So, as before with the other parts, use of the paint stripper and lots of time. What a state it reveals. Lots of rust spider webs under the paint. Also, the number plate holder has a nice trail of holes where the rear wheel has thrown water and dirt at it. The other side has been protected by chain grease. Next, lots of wire brushing to clean off the rust. The part is made of two parts, spot welded together. I could not clean between the parts, so I made the decision to separate them. So different sized drills and an end mill bit used to drill out the spot welds, and then held the piece in a vise and used an old screwdriver and hammer to part them. And then lots more wire brushing to remove the rust that I've revealed. And this shows a bit of a sorry state. So the number plate holder, you can see the rust where the two layers were joined together with the spot welds, the row of holes going up what would have been the left hand side. The actual light holder doesn't look too bad once I've cleaned off the rust, so I think that will be okay once primed and painted. However, the number plate holder is going to need lots of treatment, welding or something in order to repair this mess. I'm sorry the camera failed here, so photos only. I cut out the damaged part, cut a piece to replace it with, and held it in place with a little magnet. I then practiced with my new MIG welder to play with the settings and practice. It's some years since I did any welding. And here we have two views of my welding. More practice needed, I think. I kept blowing holes in the thin material and put far too much heat into it when grinding the welds back. Also, the edges of the plate had been nibbled away by rust, and I don't think I can repair this. So I thought I'd experiment with hammer forming. I measured the plate to produce a sketch with dimensions, and then drew it out in CAD. From CAD I could produce a 3D printed mould that I could hammer the metal to. It's in PLA and I've used a 50% infill to strengthen it. It took nearly a day to print. Ignore the wonky cut on the steel. I forgot my bandsaw wanders when cutting. I ground the end of an old cold chisel to a round profile and then hammered the steel against the profile. I used M3 screws to hold it in place. It was in a case of lots of hammering using the old cold chisel and the bolster hammer. I think I annoyed the neighbours. I certainly wore my arm out. I used my planishing hammer to peen over the edges. It's a couple of hours of hammering to get it to this stage so far. For this bit I'm using a second mould where I've made the rebate deeper to get more of an impression. Again the bolster hammer and chisel to get the shape. And it's almost there. It's just the rebates around the edge need doing. So again I used my planishing hammer to peen over the corners and you can see it's there. Unfortunately you can also see that I didn't cut the steel to size, so this has just worked as an experiment. Because of the finish where I've hammered, I'm not pleased with this. It's worked okay, but I shall have to try a different way. The next experiment was with press forming. So this was to try and press the form into the metal using two moulds, again printed out of PLA. Each mould took probably a day to print. I've used holes in the corner to get them to register together correctly. I also resurrected my grandfather's old 1930s vise to use, as it is much larger than my number 5 record. I've used it to clamp and squeeze the steel between the two moulds. I moved the piece around in the vise each time I squeezed to try and get even pressure over the whole area. The finished result looks good to me. Just the edges to peen over. This time I'd made the steel larger than I needed, so I'm using my nibbler to trim off the edges down to a more suitable size. Apologies again, my camera failed when I was peeling it over, so now you can see me using the angle grinder to trim the rebate down to a more reasonable size, closer to the original part. Here we can see the two moulds after they have been used. I think the 50% infill helped because they've survived, they don't appear to have any damage. And here is the final part. The rebate trimmed, so it's got the curve to it to give the panel some strength, and then I've just got the holes to drill. And essentially I've traced through the old panel onto the new one, found the centres for the two large nut holes and the four corner holes that line it up with the light holder. Pillar drill used to drill the holes, 5mm diameter hole in the corners, and then a step drill to get the larger holes through which you can access the bolts or nuts that hold it onto the mudguard. A bit of deburring with my deburring tool and then finishing off with a small file. And here we are with the finished license plate holder, remade, lining up with the light holder. The two bits are supposed to be spot welded together, but given my welding schools I've decided to use cap-headed bolts and lock nuts, so there's just the four of those holding the two parts together. Here it is painted. Don't look at the top, I'm afraid two different makes of paint reacted, so I'm going to have to do that again. But I'm pleased with that, having made a new part. I think it looks good, and of course it saved me the £70 or £100 that they go for online, even though I've probably got hours and hours of work in it.